So now we're finally going to talk about body language. And I wanted to highlight this because I was so blown away when I was first getting trained in these de-escalation strategies, how impacted our communication is based on nonverbal communication. And to me, like these numbers just blew my mind. 93% of our communication, 93% is nonverbal. And that includes body language and tone, how we're actually how the words are actually coming out as opposed to the words itself that are being spoken. 93%. So it's really important that we identify how we're communicating, non-verbally to our students in those situations of crisis behaviors. So you may be trying to de-escalate a situation and you're talking to a student and they're angry or they're upset or they're sad or whatever the case may be. But your body language, how you are around them, may be perceived as threatening. Your arms are crossed. You are kind of in their face. You are hovering over them. Can be perceived as threatening, and you may not realize it. And that's the thing. And I feel like a lot of the times that's something that when we are in the heat of those moments of those high crisis behavior situations, we don't realize how much that is impacting the situation itself, right? And on top of that, when you're angry, or when people are angry, I know myself, it's the same way. They tend to not listen effectively to what the words that are actually being said. I think that's important because, really there's a difference between hearing and listening. I think we all know that, but just kind of understanding that as a part of communication and body language and being in those situations of actually the difference between hearing something and actually listen to what is being said is so important. So it's also important that we recognize and understand the nonverbal cues from a student who has the potential of escalating, meaning that we need to pick up on some nonverbal cues from our students who might be on the trajectory of increasing their kind of level of crisis in a particular situation. Oftentimes, students see and then react to what you're saying based on your body language. So again, kind of like I was saying, where your arms are crossed because you're frustrated, they're going to react because of what you are saying and how you're saying it with your body language. So just be aware of that. So just be careful and really think about, and sometimes it takes practice about the message you are sending and how it's being received. So not only do you have to think about it yourself, of okay, what is my body saying right now? What is my facial features saying? But you also need to think about how is this going to be received to the student if I'm leaning over their desk and they're doing something they're not supposed to. How is that going to be perceived from the student's perspective? That's super important as well. So I have a couple of do's and don'ts when it comes to body language that you can take to heart as you are kind of practicing and thinking about this in behavior situations that may happen in your classroom. Here's a couple of things that you should take into consideration when you're thinking about your body language, right? The first thing is demonstrate an open posture, and that's just arms relaxed at your sides or in front of you, and you're orientated toward the student, not looking away, distracted at something else, right? One of the biggest things for me was making sure what my face was saying matched what I was trying to say as well. So, things like rolling your eyes, it's not okay, or, shaking your head could be part of your face, or not maintaining eye contact with the student as you're trying to de-escalate. And then an important thing for us as teachers is to be aware of our own emotional state in these situations. Because like I was saying at the very beginning, sometimes we can kind of fly off the handle as well when we get frustrated in a particular behavior situation. Be aware of things like personal space and your surroundings. One, just in case things continue to escalate, even though you're trying to de-escalate them. And just, we don't like your personal space intruded, and neither do our students either. The biggest thing though is to remain calm, stay calm through the situation that's happening. It may be hard to do, you may get super frustrated, but try to bring your emotional state to a calm level and to maintain calm when the situation is happening in the classroom itself. And here's some things you probably shouldn't consider doing in regards to body language, and that's things like pointing at a student. That seems it's very accusatory or threatening. Shrugging your shoulders, like why would you do that? It's almost comes off as uncaring or not knowing. Things like we've talked about demonstrating a rigid posture, things like crossing your arms, clenching your teeth, fake it. You're trying to fake smile through it because the situation is making me very angry personally, and I'm just going to fake through it. It's probably not a good thing. It doesn't promote trust when you do things like that. So I have some examples of some other challenging postures when it comes to body language. So a challenging posture is any posture that tends to threaten another person or escalate any situation. So that includes the following: face to face, nose to nose, being toe to toe, leaning forward, you're touching them, your finger pointing, or your arms are folded across the body. In opposition, or oppositely, non-challenging postures look something like this. Non-challenging postures tend to not be perceived as threatening, and that is being on the same level as the student. If the student is at the desk, maybe squatting down to be on their level, providing adequate personal space, especially 6 feet away as a joke for during this pandemic, but just adequate personal space, having your arms relaxed to your sides, your facial expressions are either non-emotional or non-threatening. You're aware of your surroundings and you're actually ready to listen. You look like you want to help them as opposed to you want to get them in trouble or fix the solution quickly without regarding their behaviors in themselves or what's happening in the situation in regards to their behavior. So that other piece of nonverbal communication, right? We had body language, was tone. And that tone has to do with our voice. And when we're talking about our voice, it's not, well, really, it's kind of like that old argumentative talk. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Kind of thing, right? You probably heard that many, many times before. It's in movies and all, it's in a bunch of skits and things like that. But it's really true, when you actually think about how you say what you say. It's not really about the words for the most part. Remember, words was only 7% in that pie chart of communication. It's how we say it. And so there's 4 main aspects of our voice, and that is tone or intonation, volume, cadence or the rate of our speech, and the inflection of our voice. Now, we probably haven't actually, took a magnifying glass to our voice and kind of individualized each of those things as separate parts, but really, if you don't consider those when you are speaking to a student in a crisis situation, it can really either escalate or de-escalate their response or the situation as a whole, right? So as an example, I could raise my voice like this and talk a little bit slower and more pointed, and it may make you feel like I'm talking down to you because you don't understand. And that's just obviously a silly example, but we may not realize that we're doing that, and that tone and that inflection and the cadence of that pointed cadence may be perceived on the other end as something completely different than what you were actually trying to say. So, thinking about those as we are communicating and as we're listening can really be of good benefit for us when we're trying to de-escalate crisis situations for our students. So I have some do's and some don'ts as it pertains to our voice when we're trying to communicate. So here I have listed a couple of tips, a couple of strategies, things that you may not, again, think about consciously as you're speaking, but just things like speaking slowly, using the just right volume, not too loud, not too soft, a controlled voice, something that is calm but firm, maybe confidence for both you and the person. Again, we talked about this earlier, but use humor sparingly when you're trying to lighten the situation. avoid sarcasm. And remember, you always want to be respectful of the student because you want that respect back yourself. And in regards to things we shouldn't do to our voice, that we don't really want to do as we're trying to communicate, is using a low voice level. Um, you've probably seen in movies and TV shows where they're like, oh, they're not yelling, so they must be angry at me, kind of thing. I think that's kind of what it's talking about. It's like I'm not going to talk like this when I'm talking to a student because it may be perceived as challenging or may create fear in them as a response, unknowingly, obviously, as an example, or using a raised voice, which could automatically promote more anger, defensive. Maybe they get anxiety because from you raising your voice because they get a lot of that elsewhere, and to hear it come from you could be a triggering effect for some students, or it may just disrupt not only the situation you're trying to handle, but disrupt the rest of the class as well. And then again, use sarcasm or humor. If you are going to use sarcasm or humor, again, like I said earlier, it should never be targeted at or towards or about the student or the situation. It could maybe be sarcasm about something else that has nothing to do with the situation, or something humorous that has nothing to do with the situation, but nothing that is specifically targeted at the student, about the student, or toward the student. Those are big no-nos. So as we kind of wrap up this talk about effectively and positively de-escalating a situation through communication and listening, here's just a couple of things as a wrap-up that we just probably want to remember, right? One is to remain calm. Be sure to validate their feelings and their situation. I understand why you might be upset, but again, you're not agreeing with what they did because they were upset. A lot of the times when I was having these conversations with students, it was a one-on-one I pulled the student to the side while the other students were working on something else to give them that one-on-one atmosphere if that's possible. Remember to be empathetic and try to create and provide a safe space for that communication. Be non-judgmental, promote trust, really listen, don't lecture or give advice. And one of the biggest things that helped me out when I was learning all these strategies too was that if you are trying to use these de-escalation strategies, you are ultimately being proactive, not reactive. When you see a student that is beginning to be upset, or that a student that is in a crisis mode or level or high crisis level, it is very different to be proactive and know some of those, like, I guess, like trigger signs that students would, whether that's verbal or nonverbal, that would cause them to escalate their behavior levels, as opposed to having to react that on the other side of it. It's by far like pales in comparison to actually being proactive and having all of these kind of things kind of tucked into your back pocket and thinking about and reflecting on as the situation is happening. So you're being proactive as opposed to being reactive when it comes to beginning this kind of de-escalation journey that you're going on. So I also wanted to provide you with some more specific de-escalation strategies that are geared more towards younger students and older students. These are things that you could take and put it in your back pocket and have ready to go if situations like this happen, to promote de-escalation of a certain situation in your classroom. So I'm not going to read these to you due to time, but you can pause the video to read them. You can take a screenshot if you want. Or you could write some notes down as you pause and kind of reflect on things that you could actually use in your own classroom. So here's some de-escalation strategies for younger students, and here's some de-escalation strategies that are geared more towards older students.